Happy Halloween. It's spooky season, and today we're going to talk about the history of DC Bronze Age horror. Up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hello, panelologists. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics, coming to you with another video. Please like, comment, subscribe. Check out the description of this video for links to my eBay store, email, Instagram, whatnot. Tomorrow, Saturday, November 1st, I'm going to be setting up at the Bronx Comic Show that is organized by Streetside Anthony and Lone Wolf Comics. There's the flyer here, and I'm going to put the link to the tickets in the description. If you're in the Bronx, stop by, say hello, hang out, look at some comics. Should be a really cool show. Hope to see you there. So we're going to go through the history of DC horror, and I want to kind of put it in a timeline. So we get a look at like how it developed and how it affected really a lot more than just the niche horror books. Now the DC horror has become, Bronze Age horror, both DC and Marvel, has become quite popular in the last couple of years. Because of the cover art, the classic artists that were working at the time. I had done a video a couple of years ago comparing DC and Marvel Bronze Age horror, and I noted the main difference at the time was DC was more anthology-based and based on the artists, where Marvel was more character-based. Marvel produced characters like Werewolf by Night, Dracula, The Living Mummy, Frankenstein, Man-Thing. DC did produce their share of characters, but they also had characters that were from prior to the Bronze Age and prior to horror. So anyway, let's go way back. Now, DC pre-code, there's really no DC pre-code horror. They didn't jump into the frenzy that EC Comics set off, and then was followed by so many other publishers, including like Timely, /Atlas, Harvey Comics. So many of them had horror comics. And what kind of distinguishes pre-code horror is the really horrific nature of it, the insanity, the, blazing poker to the eye, or the woman being strangled underwater, or decapitations, or suicides and beheadings. DC didn't do that. The horror comics that they had in the early 1950s were kind of ghost stories, or the titles that we may think of as horror titles were kind of sci-fi, horror, that sort of thing. So let's go all the way back to 1950. So we go back to 1950. August, September 1950 is the first issue of Strange Adventures. And you can see from the cover, it is a science fiction title. And that's what it says at the top, Amazing Science Fiction Tales. So Strange Adventures ran into the early 1970s. And very quickly, Captain Comet became the lead feature. And he had his share of science fiction stories throughout the 1950s. And then it became a little bit more of a generic science fiction title. I'm just kind of scrolling through some of the covers here. And you had, as you got into the Silver Age, you had guerrilla covers, other sci-fi covers. And it was a science fiction anthology title well into the Silver Age. Now, the one title, or the first title we might think of in terms of DC horror, is House of Mystery. That premiered in December, January 1951. And we can see here the cover. Wanda was a werewolf. I fell in love with a witch, man, or monster. This is pre-code horror. Only a silver bullet will destroy a werewolf. This woman is a werewolf. But it never got as horrific as some of the other, the EC titles and stuff. There's nobody's head being dunked into a vat of acid and that kind of stuff. So we had kind of these spooky stories, but they didn't veer into the horrific. As we veer into the Silver Age and the code era, like here's the final pre-code issue of House of Mystery is issue number 35. And The Man Who Haunted a Ghost. It's a ghost story. It's not really as horrific as what we think of most pre-code horror, and the title endured. It remained a seller for DC as an anthology title with kind of, oddball stories, science fiction stories, kind of in the vein of the later TV show series, The Twilight Zone. So that was House of Mystery, right? Now, one, I guess, a horror character that debuted in the early golden age, or late golden age, I should say, is Phantom Stranger. The first issue of his first series is in August, September of 1952. And at this point in time, he looks much like the Phantom Stranger that would be well known later on with kind of the dark trench coat and fedora. He was more or less a paranormal detective. The title lasted just 6 issues at the time, and it was just these, I guess you would best call them paranormal detective stories, right? The Phantom Stranger knew the terrible secret of the doorway in the sky. So is he man or ghost? 6 issues. And then now one of the other titles, Tales of the Unexpected, which premiered in February of 1956 during the Comics Code. Again, much more of a science fiction title, but it would change. They would fairly early in the run of Tales of the Unexpected. Again, it was, a sci-fi anthology title, but you would get Space Ranger coming in as a lead character in that for a while. As we're in the Silver Age, right? Tales of the Unexpected, the House of Secrets title also began in 1956 with a cover date of December. And again, the hand ripping the head off the Sphinx. A science fiction anthology title. We get gorillas. Gorillas were quite popular with DC Comics in the Silver Age. Match with the Gorilla Genius. That's what it was. Now, in issue number 23 of House of Secrets, we get the first appearance of Mark Merlin, who was also a paranormal detective, eventually became Prince Rahman, who was more of a magical character, kind of maybe a Doctor Strange knockoff. And interestingly, in issue 61 of House of Secrets from August of 1963, we get the first appearance of Eclipso, Eclipso himself was a villain, who had a human alter ego who was not villainous. He got possessed by Eclipso. Eclipso became a big bad much later on, but he did have a run for, I guess, 20 issues in House of Secrets. Now, House of Mystery went from an anthology title, and in 1964, it became a superhero title featuring, as the cover feature, John Jones for about a year. John Jones, the Martian Manhunter, had been in Detective Comics in the 1950s and then a charter member of the Justice League. But in those Detective Comics stories, he was a detective that would only occasionally become the Martian Manhunter and use his powers. It was really his membership in the Justice League. And when the Justice League premiered in Brave and the Bold 28, there weren't a lot of superheroes to choose from, right? You had Flash, Green Lantern, Aquaman, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. They did add Green Arrow later on. He was a regular feature at the time, but most of the other features were not contemporary features on Earth. They were Superboy, it was Superman as a boy, or it was Adam Strange, who was on a different planet. So there were very few superheroes to choose from. This comes well into the Martian Manhunter's membership in the Justice League. Then the year later, 1965, the format of House of Mystery changed with issue 156, and you got Dial H for Hero, where this kid, Robbie Reed, found this alien dial-y thing. Dial is a way that we used to put in the phone numbers back in the day for you kids. And so he could dial hero, and he could become different heroes, and readers would submit ideas for heroes like Giant Boy, the Mole, or the Cometeer. Plastic Man, he did become Plastic Man at one point. That's the first Silver Age appearance of Plastic Man. But we're not at horror yet. If we move on to House of Secrets number 80 with Eclipso and Prince Rahman, that's the last issue of House of Secrets. And this is in October of 1966. So House of Secrets was canceled. 1 year later, in Strange Adventures, which had been a science fiction anthology, we get October 1967, Strange Adventures 205, the first appearance of Dead Man. Art by Carmine Infantino. Dead Man was a circus acrobat who was killed, and then he was sent back to Earth, and he could possess the bodies of individuals temporarily in order to find out who had killed him, essentially. And so this was a character that DC used quite a bit later on. The feature would run for 12 issues through Strange Adventures 216, and starting with 206, Neil Adams would do the pencils on both the cover and the interior. And that made it a very popular feature, which, if we go to 9, if we look at the covers of those issues, there's some very ones. Like this one, 207, I think had won an award for the best cover of the year. And this was Neil Adams right at his peak. And this predated his work on Batman or Green Lantern. So you had created this horror character. Now, later in the year, just a couple of months later, they had already brought him back in Showcase. DC gave the Spectre his own series. The Spectre had been a headliner in the Golden Age, early and more fun comics. He was a police officer who was killed by the mob in the line of duty and was resurrected to be vengeance on Earth. And the Spectre, he was an original member of the Justice Society, did have a tryout and Showcase, and did his own series for 10 issues, which are remembered from some classic covers, issues 2 through 4 by Neil Adams, and I believe it's 8 through 10 are by Nick Cardy. Tales of the Unexpected, right, which was an anthology. Its last issue was issue number 104 in January of 1968, but it wasn't canceled. And that leads us to this era, late Silver Age, when DC really entered the horror genre as we think of it today, right? So Tales of Expected, this is January of 1968, Neil Adams cover. Tales of the Unexpected was retitled just Unexpected, starting with issue 105. It didn't skip a beat. It came out 2 months later. And it included Johnny Peril as another paranormal detective. He had been a character going back, an action character going back to the Golden Age, and was brought back here. But really, it was June of 1968, and this issue number 174, House of Mystery, which starts DC horror as we think of it. What we think of as Bronze Age horror, with this cover by Joe Orlando, where these children are being beckoned into a house, the House of Mystery. And it was an anthology where the stories were much like EC did with, like, the Crypt Keeper and stuff. The character Kane would narrate the stories. So he was the headliner, but it was always different stories. You just get like 3 stories with different artists in here. But Kane would premiere in issue 175 with this Neil Adams cover. That's the first appearance of Kane. Now, this is August of 1968. The following month, in September, we get the first horror issue of The Unexpected, Journey to a Nightmare. It hasn't really changed from the earlier Johnny Peril issues. But the stories are narrated by the Mad Mod Witch. It's 1968. 1969, then we can see here, Unexpected, they changed the trade dress with issue 115, and that's kind of the one that in 1969 that folks of pre-code horror remember. And Unexpected ran for quite a bit of time. Again, a lot of these covers were by Neil Adams, Joe Orlando, Nick Cardy, William Michael Kaluta, or is it Michael William Kaluta? I always get that confused. And later on, Bernie Wrightson, a staple of DC's horror line. Now, Showcase number 80, cover dated February 1969, brings back the Phantom Stranger, his first appearance in the Silver Age. And you can see this is clearly a horror-influenced cover by Neil Adams. The following month, we get a new horror title, Witching Hour #1, which was narrated by the three witches, Mordred, Mildred, and Cynthia. And there are no bones about it. This is a horror title. And it would continue for a number of years. And again, these are anthology titles with popular covers. You have number 28 with this skeleton Santa. Trying to think what the other, I think that's probably one of the most popular covers in the run of Witching Hour as we go into the 70s. A lot of like skeleton covers and witches. Now, House of Mystery number 179 is a key issue. It's from April of 69. So these are like monthly succession. This is the first interior art by Bernie Wrightson. Now, do you dare enter the House of Mystery? We're into what we would think of as Bronze Age horror, but we're still in the Silver Age because it's 1969. And then 2 months later, in September, The Phantom Stranger gets his own title. It would run for 41 issues and include some great covers again. Adams, Cardy, Jim Aparo, and so on. Now, in 3 months later, in September of 1969, we get DC Special. And it doesn't give it a horror title, just says 13 shock-ending stories. Nick Cardy cover. This is the first appearance of Abel. The same month, House of Secrets is brought back as a regular title, with Abel, as you see in the upper left-hand corner, as the narrator of House of Secrets. That's his second appearance. It's the origin of the House of Secrets. Basically, the story tells about how this is the House of Secrets. It goes along with the House of Mystery. Cain also appears in it. They're Cain and Abel. They're the biblical brothers. And these characters were also used in the Sandman series by Neil Gaiman in the late 80s, early 90s. So you have now a whole, you have House of Mystery, House of Secrets, Unexpected, Witching Hour, and Phantom Stranger as DC's horror line at the time. But to be honest, at this, as we're getting into the Bronze Age, and again, some classic House of Secrets covers. I'm going to spotlight a few of the earlier ones here, but not this one. This one's a classic one. The hockey team chasing the figure skater. The Nick Cardy cover from 1973, and some of these are fetching pretty high values at the time. Now, I think the horror element also influenced DC's superhero line. 1970, June, Detective Comics 400, the first appearance of Man-Bat. Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. Remember, in Batman at this time, no Joker, no Penguin, no Riddler, no Catwoman. All of those characters that were quite popular in the Batman TV series were put to the side, and different villains, Ra's al Ghul and Talia al Ghul, and here Man-Bat, who is essentially a vampire-esque character, predating Morbius. So then you also have like this Challengers of the Unknown cover, which kind of looks like a scene out of The Exorcist, with Dead Man appearing. This Nick Cardy cover of Superman's Girlfriend Lois Lane, number 103. This is from August of 1970, where Lois is turned into a demon and is marrying Satan. Then this classic cover by Neil Adams, Batman 227, very much a gothic horror element to this. An homage to Detective Comics 31, which is like a vampire story. And then kind of we bring the horror into the regular DC continuity with Brave and the Bold number 93, Batman, and the House of Mystery with a Neil Adams cover. So the lines are now blurred. Right now, it's becoming part of, and a lot of other covers at the time you can see that are, especially because they're drawn by Carty or they're drawn by Adams and do have elements of horror and gothic in them. Now, in 1971, DC launched a title, starting with issue number 4, DC 100-page Super Spectacular, and the first issue was Weird Mystery Tales. The title of the book is DC 100-page Super Spectacular, ran for 20 from issue 4 to 22. It's a Bernie Wrightson cover, and the back cover is the Virgin variant of this. So it's 100 pages. I think I don't know if there are any news stories, probably not based on the other 100 pages at the time, of reprints from this time. In addition, you have another great artist you have working here is Gray Morrow, this classic House of Secrets cover, issue number 89, which looks like a gothic romance novel with the oval cover design. That is really awesome. That's a great cover. DC Special number 11 was also, I believe this is Nick Carty, Gargoyles, Monster Creatures, the Beast Asteroid, Barstar Beast, the Stone Sentinels of Giant Island. Again, promoting horror comics. But probably the most important horror comic of DC's Bronze Age is House of Secrets 92, the first appearance of Swamp Thing. Now, this is a little bit different than the Swamp Thing that we know. This is a period piece. It was set, I think, in the early 20th century, and it is a different character of Swamp Thing. But this is the first appearance of Swamp Thing. It's a very valuable book, and it now brings, again, horror from being anthology to creating a character that would be used again. Although I don't think DC was quite sure that they were going to have Swamp Thing being an ongoing character for, the next 50 plus years, because the very next month, in August of 1971, in Phantom Stranger number 14, we see the specter of the stalking swamp. So we see this swamp monster here on a Neil Adams cover. Actually, the swamp monster is in the Dr. 13 story by Len Wein, who co-created Swamp Thing along with Bernie Wrightson and Tony DiZuniga. This is around the same time that Man-Thing came out at Marvel, so there are a lot of swamp creatures. This is not a precursor to Swamp Thing because it doesn't predate Swamp Thing, but Len Wein just came up with a similar story. Now, DC launched a whole bunch of new titles in late 1971. The cover date of October is Dark Mansion of Forbidden Love, a gothic romance title. And what was interesting about this, it was an anthology title, but it's a full-length novel of love and danger complete in this issue, right? The horror romance. Under this title, it ran for 4 issues. Very popular books to collect. And we see here they have the 4 issues. These are quite sought after by collectors. Also, that very same month was Ghosts number 1, right? And Ghosts ran for 112 issues, right? Another entry into the DC Bronze Age horror genre. And the same month, Weird War Tales number 1, DC's first weird title. And we will talk about that with a Joe Kubert cover. So this was a crossover between horror and war comics, and it lasted for 124 issues. So these books didn't go away too quickly. And then the very next month, we got the first issue of Sinister House of Secret Love, another gothic romance title, I guess. And again, these covers, especially the first few issues, look very much like you would see in novels at the time. Again, 4 issues. And the gothic romance spilled over into DC's mainstream, like Wonder Woman Here we have the cover of Wonder Woman number 199 from April of 1972, which includes a classic Wonder Woman element of bondage. And then the next issue, issue 200, is similar with Wonder Woman, who is not Wonder Woman at this time. It's the I Ching era. She's chained to this table, and this woman with the mask is coming in with the knife. Is that Dr. Psycho? I don't think so. Now, in June of 1972, Dark Mansion of Forbidden Love changed the title to Forbidden Tales of Dark Mansion, and it continued for another 11 issues. And similarly, the following month, the Sinister House of Secret Love became the Secrets of Sinister House, kind of downplaying the romance angle to become more of a straight horror title. And this ran for another 14 issues. Now, I talked about Weird War Tales. DC liked their weird stuff. They rebranded All-Star Western in July of 72 to Weird Western Tales. And you can see the cover here by Joe Kubert. Features El Diablo and this Native American with skulls around him, a horror element. Jonah Hex became the headliner in this as it ran another 59 issues, and then Jonah Hex got his own title. And also a new title from DC was Weird Mystery Tales. This is cover dated August of 1972, so another horror title, and it ran for 24 issues. Is that a key significance of issue number 18? First appearance of Lucian. Then, also 1972, you got a new character, Demon, in September of 1972 by Jack Kirby. A Demon is a horror character, but this, I think, editorially was different than the horror books because it was kind of under Kirby's control. This ran for 16 issues in the original run, all by Jack Kirby. Another entry into the weird was Weird Worlds. This was one of the Edgar Rice Burroughs properties that DC had acquired along with Tarzan and Korak. Here, it's John Carter. John Carter did not get his own title in DC. He got it in Marvel a few years later, and Weird Worlds ran with John Carter and Iron Wolf, Edgar Rice Burroughs properties, for 10 issues. Then, in cover date November 1972, we get Swamp Thing by Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson. He gets his own title, and it ran for a total of 24 issues. The first 10 had art by Bernie Wrightson, and then I think it was Nestor Redondo took over, and it ran its course for 24 issues. But again, Swamp Thing being hugely popular to this day. He was announced as part of James Gunn's Gods and Monsters first chapter in the DCU, but we haven't heard how that's been developed. It's been, 2 TV series, an animated series, and 2 feature films for Swamp Thing over the years. One of DC's popular characters, and we will address him in a little bit. Now, Adventure Comics in number 428 premiered a new character, Black Orchid, who was a mysterious character. And she ran for 3 issues from 428 to 430. DC also published, starting in November of 1973, Black Magic, which reprinted Jack Kirby and Joe Simon stories from the original Black Magic run in the 1950s from Prize Comics. Here we see, I think, is that MODOK's mom? This ran for just 9 issues. DC did a lot of reprint titles at the time, and I guess they did acquire the rights to the Avon stories. They also published a couple of treasuries. This Nick Cardy cover of House of Mystery, which is very reminiscent of the cover to House of Mystery number 174. But that was a Joe Orlando cover. This is a Cardy cover. And then in Adventure Comics 431, the Spectre took over for 10 issues as the lead feature. It was rebranded on the cover, but not in the indicia, as Weird Adventure Comics. This was the final entry into the DC Weird line of the early 1970s. And this was very much in the spirit, pun intended, of the old EC comics, where here the Spectre is, you know, like melting this guy's hands. He turns another guy into wood. Just does horrific things to seek vengeance upon evildoers. The stories were by Michael Fleischer. The art was by Jim Aparo. And this was a really great run of adventure comics. And then there was another Ghosts Treasury. This is limited collector's edition C32. It probably came out 1 year after the previous one as a Halloween special. Now, then in 1975, DC launched more horror titles, a couple more. They launched Secrets of Haunted House, cover dated May of 1975. It was a bi-monthly, and it ran for a total of 46 issues. Probably the most well-known in terms of cover. This is now a very expensive cover. And they also, no, that's Lucien. Lucien is the narrator here. He does look a little bit like Kane, but it's Lucien. This is a classic cover. You can see here, like, you know, graded mid-grades are $200-300 for this book. And especially about this time of year. That is just an awesome cover. This is a Bernie Wrightson cover, The Secrets of Haunted House #5. And then the following month, and I guess they alternated bi-monthly, was the first issue of Tales of Ghost Castle. This ran a shorter run. It only ran for 3 issues. And then they introduced in 1976, in September, another horror character, Ragman. A lot of these characters have become members of the Justice League Dark. Other characters that didn't necessarily have horror elements to them, and this is a Joe Kubert cover, became members of Justice League Dark as well, like Shade the Changing Man. But you had Dead Man, Dr. Fate, Phantom Stranger, and so on. Now, one of the most popular horror books of the later 70s is this, DC Superstars #11, with this great Gray Morrow Zatanna cover. This is the first of his Zatanna solo book. DC Superstars was an anthology title which focused on a different genre each month. But this is the classic one. Now, they introduced another character in February of 1977 in Doorway to Nightmare #1, the first appearance of Madame Xanadu. And this title lasted for 5 issues. Now, in April of 1977, House of Mystery became a dollar comic. I think it was 80 pages. Here we have a Neil Adams cover, a late Neil Adams cover. He did a number of covers for DC in the late 70s, including like Superman Family and some other smaller titles. And House of Mystery ran for a dollar comic for a while. In the meantime, in November of 1978, House of Secrets came to its end, had its final issue, as did a couple of the other horror titles. And in February of 1979, basically Witching Hour, House of Secrets were combined into Unexpected as an 80-page book. This was great because it had no ads. It was now 68 pages, not 80. It was a dollar comic. 68 pages, not 80, but it did have wraparound covers. And then we get some other characters that DC premiered. This is kind of nearing the end of the Bronze Age horror. Haunted Skyscraper. That is pretty cool cover. That is fun. In Weird War Tales #93, DC premiered The Creature Commandos, and this is cover dated November 1980. Of course, The Creature Commandos, this book became hugely popular when James Gunn announced there's going to be an animated series, even though the animated series doesn't bear much resemblance in terms of the characters to this book. And for this title, the Creature Commandos were sometimes a headliner, sometimes GI Robot, sometimes neither for a while. And then in House of Mystery #290 in March of 1981, we get I, Vampire, Andrew Bennett. So we get these ongoing stories of a vampire, Joe Kubert cover here. Madame Xanadu did get a one-shot in April of 1981 because this basically wrapped up the story. I think it was And it's Marshall Rogers and Steve Englehart. And a brand new Brian Boland science fiction shocker. It is a cool book. Wrapped up the story from Doorway to Nightmare. Then we get, in May of 1982, we get Saga the Swamp Thing #1. Swamp Thing comes back as a new title, and it hangs in there as, he's part of the DC universe. He was in DC Comics Presents at this time. Swamp Thing, he was in Challengers of the Unknown after his own title was canceled. Following this, just a couple months later, in May of 1982, Unexpected has its final issue with 222. DC introduced a new one by Marv Wolfman and Gene Colan, Night Force. They had premiered in, what was it, Teen Titans 24 or 16? One of the issues of Teen Titans was a preview. Night Force. Night Force ran for 14 issues and really isn't, it's kind of like this tail end of Bronze Age horror. But really the end of Bronze Age horror here is in October of 1983 when the House of Mystery goes up for sale. Kane leaves the House of Mystery, and it's the final issue. After 321 issues, House of Mystery's done, and that really is the end of horror in DC. The Swamp Thing title continued, and in issue 20, January of 84, Alan Moore took over the writing duties. He reimagined Swamp Thing's origin the next month in a classic storyline. And then in issue 37, in June of 1985, he introduces John Constantine. And that kind of ends the Bronze Age, because Constantine's first appearance is here in Swamp Thing, Saga the Swamp Thing #37. His second appearance is in Crisis on Infinite Earths, which for me is definitely the end of the Bronze Age. There would be a remembrance of the Bronze Age of horror early in the Copper Age, and that is in January of 1986 with Elvira's House of Mystery, this Brian Boland cover. It ran for 11 issues, and the last one with the cover by Dave Stevens is probably the most well-remembered, along with issue #1. And that was the end of an era. So that's a history of DC's Bronze Age horror. It's been quite popular. Now, horror elements and a lot of the characters, the storylines, that were set in place then return to DC, right? You get in the late 1980s, you get the Vertigo line. Sandman, Swamp Thing went to Vertigo line. Black Orchid had her own title. A lot of these characters have been revisited over the years. Phantom Stranger and Spectre and Demon and Deadman all remain vital parts of DC Comics and have for decades. But I think what the hallmark of DC Bronze Age horror is that era, in the late 60s to the early 1980s, the anthologies with the great cover artists like Adams, Carty, Wrightson, and others. So that's going to do it for this video. I hope you guys have a great Halloween. All treats and no tricks. So if you enjoyed it, take a look at a couple of my other videos here. And this is Jim saying until next time, enjoy your comics.